Return of the Mac. Return of the Mac. Oh, man.
The Cincinnati Bengals, they are an anomaly.
NFL leader in passing yards, in receiving yards, and in sacks.
It has gone from who day to who pay, and they pay. They pay their guys.
The Bengals are cheap, too. They're a cheap franchise.
A team with all three of those should never miss the playoffs.
I didn't think they'd sign both of them.
I didn't think so either.
Despite having one of the most talented rosters in the NFL, they find themselves entangled in financial and personnel mismanagement, which threatens to derail their future.
You see these two guys under contract, and you start to say, my goodness, I'm having nightmares. The issue is that includes the Cincinnati Bengals DBs as well, because they're looking around and they realize there is no help on the way because all of the money is now being spent on the offensive side of the ball.
It's just the new chapter in a long history of Bengals front office dysfunction. To understand how they arrived at this moment, we've got to look back at the Bengals' history of self-inflicted wounds, missed opportunities, and stubborn refusal to modernize. They did just pay T. Higgins and Jamar Chase a combined $276 million. Their franchise wet bandit destroyer Joe Burrow
All the great ones leave their mark. We're the wet bandits.
told ownership they needed to spend money and keep their offense together. And to be honest, I don't know if this is an example of the organization taking a big step in the right direction or making another catastrophic mistake in roster building. Can you get back to the Super Bowl when you are the only team in the league paying 3 players over $28.5 million a year? 4 if they give Hendrickson what he deserves. Or is paying 2 of the best receivers in the league the exact right move when your offense throws the ball more than any other team in the NFL? Or are you passing more because you never keep a lead? Is Joe Burrow one of the most highly sacked quarterbacks year in and year out because of your high passing rate or because of a bad offensive line? Do you see what I'm trying to illustrate here? Every answer the Bengals provide almost always generates another big question. I find this franchise fascinating, and today I wanted to dive in and understand why. Why are they currently and historically one of the best and worst teams in the league? I think these contracts and their history will help us learn as we go balls deep into the Cincinnati Bengals. We just crossed 716,000 subscribers here. We're trying to get to at least 725 by the NFL draft. That's doable. Today's episode is sponsored by Underdog and my code That's Good. You can play in daily fantasy or in pick'em games. You can do it with the NBA, NHL during the offseason. We're about 466 signups away from 6,000 signups. At 6,000 signups, I get a significant bonus, and if I hit that, I'm sharing it with Johnny Barks and Will Keys, who help write and edit every single video you see here. This episode today couldn't have gone up today without their help. So let's just put a number on it. They'll each get a $6,000 bonus if we get those 466 signups, but we gotta do it quickly. So use my code That's Good if you're gonna play at Underdog. Make sure you play responsibly, and that's it. Their well-being is in your hands. I am hoping that the Bengals have figured it out. I want to see the Bengals be good. The NFL is fun when they are. Joe Burrow cocked his arm back and fired 652 passes last year, finding the end zone on 43 of those occasions. He led the league in passing yards while completing 70% of his passes. The Bengals were one of the most fun teams to watch in 2024, but it's because they were tragically flawed. The Cincinnati Bengals became the first team in NFL history to have the passing yards leader, the receiving yards leader, and the sack leader, and of course not make the playoffs. The entire 2024 season for the Bengals was a statistical anomaly. To understand how they got to that point, we have to understand the Bengals as a franchise. Cincinnati, in the early years under Paul Brown, provided hope for the franchise. Founded in 1968, the Bengals made their first Super Bowl appearance in the 1981 season, led by MVP QB Ken Anderson. They returned in the 1988 season behind another MVP quarterback, Boomer Esiason. In both instances, they fell just short against Joe Montana and the San Francisco 49ers. Still, they had proven themselves as a legitimate contender, appearing primed for sustained success. At that point in time, they were an up-and-down franchise and had legitimate stars. Ken Anderson and Boomer Esiason both were league MVPs, a lengthy pass catcher by the name of Chris Collinsworth, and a bruising fullback with the signature touchdown dance in Ickey Woods. They were fun, they were cool, and they just so happened to run into the most dominant team of the 80s. Twice. And I don't know if they ever overpaid Chris Collinsworth, but we know he had $100 bills hanging out of his pockets.
So Chris, why do you think those girls really like you?
I think probably because of the money, and I'm not going to deny it. I walk around with $100 bills hanging out of my pockets usually.
Then, the 90s happened to the Bengals. Following Paul Brown's passing in 1991, his son Mike Brown took control of the franchise, and the Bengals quickly became the NFL's gold standard for incompetence, a refusal to spend money, an outdated approach to scouting and player development, and a lack of basic amenities, such as an indoor practice facility, which was finally added in 2022, turned the Bengals into a perennial laughingstock. The team didn't record a winning season from 1991 to 2004 and frequently found themselves at the bottom of the AFC standings. They were the Bungles. They couldn't help but bungle everything they touched. The only player that mattered was clock-killing Corey Dillon, who broke the single-game rushing record with 278 yards, which I remember vividly because it came against the Denver Broncos in the year 2000, but even he was a metaphor for the Bengals' failure. Dillon left Cincinnati in 2004 and immediately rushed for 1,600 yards and won a Super Bowl in New England.
Corey Dillon, a guy who once said he would rather flip hamburgers than play in Cincinnati. He was just miserable with all the losing. Is now in with the go-ahead touchdown in the Super Bowl.
Just par for the course in Southern Ohio. Unlike the 1980s, though, where Ken Anderson and Boomer Esiason provided stability at quarterback, the 90s saw Cincinnati cycle through a series of failed signal callers. David Klingler, drafted 6th overall in 1992, was supposed to be the franchise's answer at QB, but flamed out due to poor decision-making and an offensive line that couldn't protect him. The same fate befell Akili Smith, the 3rd overall pick in 1999, who lasted just 4 years in the NFL.
The New Orleans Saints offered all 7 draft picks. They said, Akili Smith's our man, we're going to draft him anyway. And it was the biggest mistake in franchise history.
The Bengals also briefly tried Jeff Blake and Neil O'Donnell, but neither was capable of turning the franchise around. Shock, I know. Blake was pretty fun to watch, especially when he was launching bombs to Carl Pickens, but it never culminated in anything better than an 8-8 season for the Bengals. Additionally, the team made disastrous personnel decisions. Cincinnati acquired the #1 draft pick in back-to-back years, drafting Dan Big Daddy Wilkinson in 1994, who actually played 13 years in the league, but only 4 of which were with the Bengals. They drafted running back Kai Jana Carter 1st overall in 1995, but he suffered a devastating knee injury before ever playing in a regular season game. Carter was supposed to be the next Emmitt Smith when he left Penn State. The Bengals handed him a 7-year, $19 million contract, and he tore a ligament in his knee on the 3rd carry of his first preseason game. Brutal, I know. He never rushed for more than 464 yards in a single season, and the Bengals passed on Hall of Fame left tackle Tony Baselli and Steve McNair, who were both taken 2nd and 3rd overall in that same draft in '95. The organization also failed to surround their new talented players with proper support. They let star offensive lineman Max Montoya leave in free agency, weakening the trenches and accelerating the team's downfall. Montoya was a mainstay on the offensive line for both Super Bowl trips, playing alongside Anthony Munoz, but they left him unprotected in 1990, and he went on to join the Raiders, where he played at a high level for 5 more years, earning a Pro Bowl nod in the process. Cincinnati also hired 32-year-old Dave Shula over future Hall of Fame coach Bill Cowher in 1992. I wonder if he'd go on to win a Super Bowl with their division rival. Nah, probably not. The 90s into the early 2000s were bad, historically bad. From 91 to 2003, the Bengals piled up a record of 63-145. That's about as nightmarish a 13-year stretch as you can find in the NFL. In 2000, the same year, they had Corey Dillon mashing defenses. They scored just 185 points. That's about 11.5 points per game. How the fuck is that even possible? I don't know, but it all ended when they found this guy. In 2003, the Bengals hired head coach Marvin Lewis, and while he made the team competitive, or at least competent, the same front office issues persisted. At long last, they finally returned to the playoffs in 2005, but a torn ACL suffered by QB Carson Palmer on the first drive of their wildcard matchup derailed their hopes. That game set the tone for the next decade. The Bengals would make the playoffs 7 times under Marvin Lewis, but never won a single postseason game, right? We've covered that in a previous video, but it's worth noting that an organization with Carson Palmer, Chad Johnson, TJ Hushmanzada, and AJ Green never once stumbled into a playoff victory in 7 tries. And not once was the head coach replaced because of the team's ineptitude in January. The pinnacle of their mismanagement was illuminated by quarterback Carson Palmer, a very good NFL quarterback who the Bengals drafted.
As a former Cincinnati Bengal and head of the Alumni Association,
you're head of the alumni?
I'd like to welcome you to our dysfunctional family.
A man who became so infuriated with the front office he retired after 7 seasons, only to unretire when they agreed to trade him to an even worse organization, the Raiders.
I can't tell you the amount of times guys were like, man, you got to go talk to Mike. And there was just some obvious upgrades that needed to happen, and we were so far underneath the salary cap, it just made sense. Maybe a day or 2 after the season, I called Mr. Brown. I was like, hey, can we talk? You have to be aggressive in pursuit of winning. I'm frustrated. I've been thinking about all this for a couple years, but it's like coming to a boiling point for me. As I was walking out, I said, Mr. Brown, if you don't trade me, I'm going to retire.
I wish him well, and he has retired. That was his choice.
Palmer would find success eventually in Arizona, but I'm thinking the Bengals, with their current signings of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, are doing their best to not make that mistake again and keep quarterback Joe Burrow happy.
I don't know Joe Burrow at all. But there will come a time, I believe, where this will stop being okay with him. You mentioned the word disgruntled. We have not seen a lot of gruntled Bengals over the years. He's sort of, they gave him the money. At some point, I think this is going to become a problem.
Now, during the Marvin Lewis era, the Bengals were notorious for being unwilling to take risks in free agency or offer guaranteed money to their best players. Instead, they often let valuable talent walk while relying on the draft. Now, this strategy sometimes worked. AJ Green, Andrew Whitworth, and Geno Atkins were all excellent draft picks, but the lack of commitment to keeping star players hurt the team's long-term prospects. The decision to let Whitworth walk in 2017, for example, was a catastrophic mistake as he went on to anchor the Rams' offensive line en route to a Super Bowl win against, that's right, the Cincinnati Bengals. Ah, shit. Whoops! Here's Big Wit talking about why he left Cincinnati.
It was actually the year before I left. I'd gone through the season, and, I'd been really in 14 and 15. I think I gave up 1 sack in 2 seasons. So I went to them and I was like, hey, my contract ends after this season. For a while there, I'd been making, 40, 30% of what most left tackles were making in the league in the last couple of years of my deal. And I was like, I'm done doing that. Like, I've earned the right. Like, you guys should give me an extension and not make me have to play out this year for such a low number. And I remember them being like, hey, we'll get back to you, blah, 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 blah. Good way to get an answer without having to go through your agent is in the first round they draft Cedric Awuehi, the left tackle from the Texas A&M. They drafted a left tackle in the first round, and then the second round they drafted another kid who played left tackle and right tackle, Jake Fisher. So in the first and second round, they picked a tackle. So that's a good clue if you're wondering and you're a veteran, you're probably not coming back to that team.
With these recent moves, it's hard to say that this version of the Bengals and how they're going to approach free agency in the draft is the same in which Big Whit was talking about. But that difference literally happened over just the last few weeks. The Bengals also had botched contract negotiations with key defensive players like Jonathan Joseph and Michael Johnson, failing to retain their services long term. Jesse Bates, a vital piece of their secondary, similarly left due to the team's reluctance to offer long-term guarantees. Meanwhile, they frequently stuck by underperforming players, as seen with their inexplicable loyalty to Andy Dalton, the Red Ryder BB gun, even after years of playoff disappointments.
For him to make comments like that, he's just showing that, that's acceptable to do that kind of stuff and say that kind of stuff.
Now, the Bengals' fortunes finally changed when they landed Joe Burrow with the first overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft. Burrow's arrival, along with elite playmakers like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, turned the Bengals into legitimate contenders. In just his second season, Burrow led Cincinnati to the Super Bowl, where they came painfully close to a championship before falling to the Rams. I think it's important to note a big reason the Bengals were able to draft Jamar Chase was because Joe Burrow tore his ACL as a rookie in Cincinnati, got to take the first receiver in the 2021 draft at pick 5. Because the future of the Bengals' success now depends on this team picking on non-top 10 draft talent, which I'm not sure they have proven they can do on any consistent basis. And for everybody who's a $10 a month Patreon member or YouTube member, our Zoom hangout has been scheduled for Wednesday this week. That information is in the YouTube community tab for members and over on Patreon. Can't wait to see your dumb faces this week. Now, just like in the past, the Bengals front office has been slow to adapt to modern roster management strategies. Their insistence on not offering large guarantees outside of the quarterback position, their refusal to negotiate extensions early, which leads to inflated costs, and their lack of aggressive roster building tactics are threatening to squander Joe Burrow's prime. The Bengals had multiple opportunities in 2023 and 2024 to extend T. Higgins before the wide receiver salaries exploded. Instead, they franchise tagged him, causing frustration. Higgins' late contract probably won't be that big of a deal, and the worst case scenario is if it doesn't work out, he'll be a cap casualty or a trade piece in a couple of years. Meanwhile, Jamar Chase, arguably the best wide receiver in football, made it clear he wanted top dollar, and he got that, and he was paid at the appropriate time. It's just rare you see both of those positions paid at the same time by the same team. Both receivers eventually given exactly what they wanted. Jamar Chase became the highest paid receiver in NFL history, making $161 million over the next 4 years. T. Higgins given $115 million over 4 years, making him the highest paid wide receiver number 2 in NFL history. Now, when you look at it, the Bengals have 3 players making $28.5 million or more annually. No other team has more than 2, and the Bengals have all 3 on offense. That's a stacked group of offensive players, but it's all tied up in the passing game, and it amounts to $124 million allotted to 3 players, roughly 45% of the team's total cap. Had they worked out one of those fucking deals a year ago, that number would have been significantly lower and nobody'd be talking about it. I think what Bengals fans know is their success has been stymied by a lack of effort and innovativeness from their owner and de facto GM Duke Tobin. We are about to see if their complete 180 and willingness to pay their top players works out. In fact, paying their 2 receivers and premier edge rusher all in the same year is another Bengals anomaly. You don't see NFL teams do that because most smart ones mitigate these issues before they arise. This approach might work. I have no issue with the team keeping the caliber of players Cincinnati just did. What gives everyone pause is these decisions are being made by a team that literally has a de facto GM in Duke Tobin, a title he's carried since 1999. Trey Hendrickson, the NFL's reigning sack leader, had also grown frustrated with the team. The Bengals rarely hand out extensions before a player's final contract year, and Hendrickson is set to make just $15.8 million in 2025, and he made it clear he wanted a raise. He requested a trade, and now it appears they will pay him. I believe possibly by the time this video's uploaded, since he will be the only team paying 4 guys more than $28.5 million per year. Credit them for getting it done, even if the road there wasn't smooth. And if I'm wrong and they traded Trey Hendrickson by the time I uploaded this video, that's actually okay too, assuming they can build through the draft, which they haven't really proven they can do on defense. Just because the Rams seamlessly moved on from Aaron Donald doesn't mean the Bengals can do that with Trey Hendrickson. While T and Jamar are not value money players like, say, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are right now in Philly, they will be in 2 years, right? The critique is the Bengals should be going all in right now by adding the final pieces, with Trey and T already under contract allowing them to do that. Instead, they are going all in on committing to those players now. Why will all of this be okay though? Why will it be irrelevant, some bullshit talking points in a year or two? Well, in part because the salary cap increases every year, yes, but more importantly, more significantly, it's Joe Burrow. He's not just a franchise quarterback, he is literally the glue holding that team together.
The Joe's made it a little bit easier on us, but we still have a very difficult situation to work through because we have good guys that want to get paid, and understandably, they want to get what they can get.
I don't know that anybody can stand on a field and watch Joe Burrow and say he's not the best player in the world.
T. Higgins made returning a priority to play with Joe Burrow. Trey Hendrickson wants to be in Cincinnati because of Joe. The front office is changing, evolving maybe because of Joe. Most NFL contracts are usually cap heavy at the end of the deal. And I think with the rising cap, Cincinnati will have more flexibility than we currently think. But like their de facto GM, Cincy also deploys the smallest scouting department with just 5 people. Most teams have double that on average. The Eagles have 18 in their personnel and scouting department. The team's problem last year and Cincy was that they were too top-heavy, too imbalanced. That's an issue I think the Bengals need to rectify. To put all that money in those 4 players, they have got to be able to develop cheaper talent. And to find that cheaper talent, maybe you should have more eyes watching college football. Because their problem last year was they were a roster that was too top-heavy, a bit imbalanced. Now that could be even more the case. Unless, of course, they crush the draft.
Spend money to keep their players, something that we've called them out about for years. You love that fact of it. But from a roster building standpoint, no one wants to hear the excuse that the defense isn't good enough when you've paid the receivers that you asked for to stay at home and have those weapons to throw the ball to.
Trey Hendrickson was the sack leader, right? But the Bengals had the 7th fewest team sacks at 36. That's like having the world's best body, while also having the world's most unkissable face. Body of Efron, face of sloth. Oren Burks was a great addition to the defense. He certainly was for the Eagles last year. But if the Eagles are moving on from him, maybe the Bengals needed to find their own Oren Burks. New defensive coordinator Al Golden may provide a boost. And the good news is Cincinnati just needs to go from the 7th worst scoring defense to top 20. The Rams and Commanders allowed 23 and 22.7 points per game last season. So what we're really talking about is the Bengals needing to shave off 2 fewer points per game to be on par with the Commanders and Rams, 2 of the most praised teams this offseason. That's obtainable. The Rams gave up more yards per game than the Bengals last year, but we watched their entire season change when their rookies on defense took over games in the second half of the season. We literally might be on track for a Bengals-Rams Super Bowl rematch. Okay, maybe now I'm just pandering to Bengals fans. I don't know. If the Bengals don't draft very well this year and next year, or add value signings in free agency, a single injury on a top-heavy roster becomes devastating. This all comes down to T. Higgins. If he plays like he has and stays healthy, I'll bet on the Bengals being in the playoffs again. If he gets hurt, we will be asking how many pieces could the Bengals have added by trading him. The Bengals front office has reached a make-or-break moment. They either modernize their approach permanently, or they risk returning to irrelevance. Bringing back Chase and assumedly Hendrickson is a start to that modern approach. The question then becomes, can the Bengals continue to operate like this year in and year out, evolving into an organization that's viewed as a destination because it takes care of their players and does anything to win, like the Philadelphia Eagles? Now that is unknown, but this is a good start, I think. I've watched enough football to know one thing is certain. There's no singular blueprint for success. Rosters can be built and managed in a myriad of ways. As long as you have a franchise QB, every approach has a chance. But if you don't reward your top players quickly, that price tag almost always goes up, and you find yourself in a bind where you have to either put yourself in cap hell or let go of a star. The Broncos did it the right way when they extended Pat Surtain while paying Russell Wilson a shit ton of dead cap money. And now the reigning defensive player of the year is just the 4th highest paid corner in the NFL. An absolute bargain, less than a year after giving PS2 his contract. The best organizations like the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Rams understand the importance of structuring contracts to maintain flexibility while keeping their core players intact. The Bengals have the talent locked up. Yes, like a prison. But if they can build their offensive line and defense through the draft, this unconventional approach will suddenly be studied as a new way to build in the NFL. That's how quickly shit evolves. Thanks for watching the Bengals episode here on That's Good Sports. Don't forget to subscribe. And Patreon and YouTube members, don't forget the Hangout is Wednesday evening this week.